The wrench slipped from Martinez's hand when he saw the lungs still breathing inside the turbine chamber. Senior aircraft mechanic Roberto Martinez had been repairing jet engines for 27 years at Denver International Airport, but nothing had prepared him for what he discovered during routine maintenance on Flight 742's port engine that cold February morning. The Airbus A320 had been grounded for 3 days after pilots reported unusual vibrations during descent, strange metallic grinding sounds that seemed to come from deep within the engine core, and an inexplicable sweet smell that had filled the cockpit during the final approach. Martinez was tasked with a complete engine teardown to identify the source of these anomalies, a job he had performed hundreds of times throughout his career without ever questioning what he might find inside. The first sign something was catastrophically wrong came when Martinez removed the engine cowling in the pre-dawn darkness of the maintenance hangar. Instead of the familiar metallic scent of aviation fuel, hydraulic fluid, and the ozone smell of electrical systems, a sweet, almost floral fragrance filled the cavernous space around the aircraft. The smell was so thick and cloying that it seemed to coat the inside of his mouth and nose, leaving a taste that reminded him of funeral flowers and hospital corridors. His assistant, Derek Chen, immediately stepped back from the engine, covering his nose with his sleeve and fighting the urge to vomit as the organic scent overwhelmed his senses. The smell was so out of place in the sterile, mechanical environment of the hangar that both men knew they weren't dealing with a standard mechanical failure. Martinez had encountered hydraulic leaks, burned wiring, overheated oil, and every other malfunction that could plague a commercial aircraft engine. But this was something entirely different. The fragrance carried undertones of something living, something that breathed and pulsed with organic life in a place where only metal and synthetic fluids should exist. Martinez reached for his heavy-duty inspection flashlight and approached the engine's intake with growing apprehension. The massive turbine blades that should have been gleaming silver in the artificial light appeared discolored, with strange reddish stains coating their surfaces. As he angled the light deeper into the engine's throat, past the first stage of compressor blades, what he saw made his hands shake so violently he nearly dropped the flashlight onto the concrete floor below. Wedged between the compressor blades, somehow intact despite the tremendous forces that should have instantly destroyed any organic matter, was a pair of small human lungs. They were pink and healthy-looking, with the delicate capillary networks clearly visible beneath translucent tissue that seems to glow with its own internal light. Most impossibly, they were moving with a slow, rhythmic breathing pattern that seemed utterly impossible given their disconnection from any body, heart, or nervous system that could sustain such function. The lungs expanded and contracted with the steady rhythm of peaceful sleep, 14 breaths per minute, exactly matching the respiratory rate of a healthy child at rest. Each breath was deep and full, the tissue expanding to maximum capacity before slowly releasing the air in a gentle sigh that seemed to echo through the metal corridors of the engine housing. Martinez counted the breaths obsessively, timing them against his watch, unable to believe what his eyes were showing him, but unable to deny the evidence of his senses. Derek Chen approached slowly, his face pale with shock and disbelief, peering over Martinez's shoulder into the engine compartment. When he saw the breathing organs, his legs nearly gave out beneath him. There was something familiar about their size and coloration, something that triggered a deep recognition he couldn't yet articulate, but that filled him with a dread that went beyond professional concern into personal terror. The lungs belonged to Sarah Chen, an 8-year-old girl who had vanished from the Denver area 6 months earlier without leaving behind so much as a footprint or a strand of hair. Her disappearance had dominated local news for weeks, with search teams combing every inch of the Rocky Mountain footholds, dragging reservoirs, and following up on hundreds of tips from concerned citizens. Police had found no trace of her, No clothing, no DNA evidence, no witnesses, nothing that could explain how she had simply disappeared while playing in her backyard on a sunny August afternoon under her mother's watchful eye. Derek Chen stared at the breathing organs with growing horror, his mind racing through memories of family gatherings, birthday parties, and bedtime stories, recognizing something terrifyingly familiar about their size and the particular shade of pink that characterized healthy lung tissue in a young child. When Martinez showed him the medical examiner's preliminary identification report 3 hours later, Derek's worst fears were confirmed in black and white laboratory findings that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The lungs belonged to his own niece, the little girl his family had mourned for half a year, whose bedroom his sister had kept exactly as Sarah had left it, waiting for a return that would never come. The discovery sent shockwaves through the aviation maintenance facility that rippled outward like concentric circles of disbelief and horror. Word spread quickly, despite desperate efforts to contain the information, and within hours, federal investigators, medical examiners, FBI agents, and officials from the National Transportation Safety Board swarmed the hangar like antibodies responding to an infection. The engine was immediately quarantined behind yellow tape and armed guards, but not before several other mechanics had witnessed the impossible sight of disembodied lungs continuing their steady breathing rhythm inside the turbine housing. Dr. Patricia Valdez, the chief medical examiner assigned to the case, had performed thousands of autopsies throughout her 23-year career, examining victims of car crashes, homicides, industrial accidents, and natural disasters. She had seen every conceivable form of human trauma and death, had testified in hundreds of court cases, and prided herself on maintaining scientific objectivity in the face of even the most disturbing evidence. But she had never encountered anything like the breathing lungs discovered in Flight 742's engine, organs that challenged everything she thought she knew about biology, physics, and the fundamental nature of life and death. The lungs showed no signs of decay, no evidence of trauma from the engine's operation, no burn marks from the extreme temperatures that should have instantly reduced them to ash. And most disturbingly, they continued to function as if still connected to a living circulatory system. Blood vessels that should have bled out within minutes of separation remained intact, somehow maintaining pressure and flow despite having no heart to pump blood through them. The tissue remained pink and viable, with oxygen saturation levels that matched those of a healthy living child. The breathing pattern was eerily consistent, exactly matching the respiratory rate documented in Sarah Chen's medical records from her last pediatric checkup 6 months before her disappearance. 14 breaths per minute, with perfect rhythm and depth, occasionally punctuated by the deeper sighs that characterize REM sleep cycles. When investigators placed sensitive monitoring equipment near the lungs, they detected not just the mechanical movement of air, but actual gas exchange occurring at the cellular level. Oxygen was being consumed at normal metabolic rates, carbon dioxide was being expelled in precise concentrations, and the tissue remained pink and viable in a way that defied every known law of biology and physics. But the investigation revealed something even more disturbing than the impossible preservation and function of the organs. Flight 742 had been in continuous service for the 6 months following Sarah Chen's disappearance, carrying thousands of passengers across the continental United States on regularly scheduled commercial flights. The aircraft had operated normally throughout this entire period, passing all routine inspections and maintenance checks, accumulating over 300 flight hours, while the lungs somehow remained hidden within the engine compartment. The lungs had somehow been present during dozens of flights, breathing steadily while the massive turbines spun at thousands of rotations per minute just inches away from their delicate tissue. Passengers had unknowingly flown thousands of miles while a missing child's organs maintained impossible life in the engine that powered their journey through the sky. Flight attendants had served meals and beverages, while Sarah Chen's lungs drew breath after breath in the mechanical darkness of the turbine housing. Aviation engineer Michael Torres was brought in from Boeing Seattle headquarters to determine how organic matter could survive inside an operating jet engine. His preliminary analysis revealed that the lungs were positioned in a location that should have been physically impossible, somehow occupying the exact space where compressor blades should have been moving at tremendous velocity. The engine's performance data showed no anomalies throughout the 6-month period, no decrease in efficiency, no signs that anything was obstructing the carefully calibrated airflow that provides thrust and power. It was as if the lungs existed in the engine while simultaneously not interfering with its operation, occupying space without displacing the mechanical components that should have destroyed them instantly. Torres spent sleepless nights running computational fluid dynamics models, trying to understand how the delicate organic tissue could coexist with the violent mechanical forces inside a commercial jet engine. Every simulation showed that the lungs should have been instantly destroyed, yet they continued breathing peacefully in defiance of engineering principles that had governed aviation for over a century. The engine's maintenance records revealed another chilling detail that sent investigators down an entirely new avenue of inquiry. 3 separate mechanics had performed comprehensive inspections on this exact engine during the 6 months the lungs were allegedly present. Each inspection had involved removing the engine cowling, examining the compressor blades, and checking for foreign object damage that could compromise flight safety. All 3 experienced professionals had signed off on the engine as being in perfect condition, with no foreign objects, no obstructions, and no anomalies detected. Either all 3 mechanics had somehow missed the obvious presence of human organs in the turbine, which seemed impossible given their combined 70 years of experience, or the lungs had only recently become visible to human perception. This raised terrifying questions about what else might be hidden within the aircraft that carry millions of passengers through the skies every day, invisible to conventional inspection methods, but present nonetheless. The FBI investigation into Sarah Chen's disappearance took on new urgency and direction as agents tried to establish any possible connection between the missing child and the aircraft. They discovered that Flight 742 had indeed been parked at Denver International Airport on the day Sarah disappeared, but the aircraft was scheduled for departure to Phoenix that evening with a full passenger load. The timeline seemed to rule out any conventional explanation for how the child or her organs could have ended up inside the engine through normal means. Security footage from the airport on the day of Sarah's disappearance was reviewed frame by teams of analysts looking for any anomaly, any sign of unauthorized access to the aircraft, or unusual activity in the restricted areas where the plane had been parked. The footage revealed nothing suspicious. The aircraft had undergone routine pre-flight inspection by certified mechanics, been serviced by ground crews who had worked for the airline for years, taken off on schedule, and completed its flight to Phoenix without incident. Ground crew members who had serviced the plane that day were interviewed extensively by federal agents, subjected to polygraph examinations, and had their backgrounds investigated with unprecedented thoroughness. None reported seeing anything suspicious or out of the ordinary. The aircraft had been secured in a restricted area of the airport, surrounded by multiple layers of security, including armed guards, motion detectors, and surveillance cameras that should have prevented any unauthorized access. Medical tests performed on the breathing lungs revealed another layer of impossibility that challenged fundamental assumptions about life and death. DNA analysis confirmed beyond any doubt that the organs belonged to Sarah Chen, matching samples taken from her hairbrush and toothbrush with over 99% certainty. But tissue samples showed cellular activity consistent with a living organism, with mitochondria producing energy, proteins being synthesized, and waste products being eliminated through unknown mechanisms. The cells were metabolically active, consuming nutrients and producing waste products despite having no apparent source of sustenance and no way to eliminate toxins from their system. Blood chemistry analysis indicated normal pH levels, adequate oxygenation, and the presence of hormones and enzymes that should have broken down within hours of death.
The tissue responded to stimuli like living flesh, contracting when touched and showing increased respiratory rate when exposed to loud noises or bright lights. Dr. Valdez consulted with colleagues across the country and around the world, searching medical literature for any documented cases of similar phenomena.
She contacted experts in organ preservation, specialists in aviation medicine, researchers studying consciousness and the nature of death itself. Medical literature contained no references to disembodied organs maintaining independent function for extended periods. No scientific framework to explain how respiratory tissue could continue operating without nervous system control or cardiovascular support. The lungs responded to external stimuli in ways that suggested not just automatic biological function, but conscious awareness. They would expand more rapidly when touched, seem to hold their breath when loud noises occurred nearby, and show changes in breathing pattern that correlated with the emotional state of people in the examination room. Nurses reported that the organs seemed to calm down when spoken to gently and became agitated when discussed in clinical terms that reduced them to mere specimens. The breathing pattern began to change after the lungs had been in federal custody for 48 hours, housed in a specialized medical facility under constant observation. Instead of the steady, peaceful rhythm of a sleeping child, the organs started displaying signs of distress that were heartbreaking to witness. Breathing became rapid and shallow, consistent with panic or fear, as if the disembodied consciousness trapped within the tissue was beginning to understand its situation. The pink coloration that had initially amazed medical observers began to fade, taking on a grayish pallor that suggested the impossible life force sustaining the organs was finally beginning to weaken. Cellular activity decreased, oxygen consumption dropped, and the rhythmic breathing that had defied explanation for weeks started becoming irregular and labored. Religious leaders from multiple faiths were consulted as the investigation expanded beyond the realms of science and medicine into territories that defied rational explanation. Father Michael Santos, who had performed last rites for Sarah Chen's family months earlier and had counseled them through the darkest period of their lives, was asked to examine the lungs and provide spiritual guidance for what many investigators had begun to consider a supernatural phenomenon. After spending an hour in prayer beside the breathing organs, Father Santos emerged from the examination room visibly shaken, his face pale and his hands trembling with an emotion that went beyond mere sympathy for the grieving family. He refused to discuss what he had experienced during his time with the lungs, but requested that the remains be treated with the respect and dignity due to a living human being, rather than evidence in a criminal investigation. The story leaked to the media despite unprecedented efforts to maintain secrecy, and Denver International Airport became the center of a media storm unlike anything in aviation history. Reporters from around the world descended on the facility, pressing airport officials, airline representatives, and federal investigators for details about the impossible discovery. Aviation experts struggled to provide rational explanations for the inexplicable, while medical professionals found themselves defending basic principles of biology that seemed to have been suspended in this case. The Federal Aviation Administration issued carefully worded statements emphasizing that all aircraft remain safe for passenger travel and that the incident represented an isolated anomaly with no implications for flight safety. But internal memos obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests revealed deep concern among agency officials about the implications of the case and fears that similar discoveries might be made in other aircraft. Additional aircraft that had operated on similar routes during the time frame of Sarah Chen's disappearance were subjected to unprecedented inspections, with mechanics searching every component for any signs of similar anomalies. The inspections revealed nothing obvious, but several maintenance workers reported strange sensations while working on engines that had operated out of Denver during the relevant period. These reports included unexplained cold spots in areas that should have been warm from recent operation, the faint sound of breathing or heartbeats coming from deep within turbine housings, and brief glimpses of movement in their peripheral vision that disappeared when they looked directly at the source.
One mechanic reported finding a child's handprint on the inside of an engine cowling, perfectly preserved in what appeared to be condensation despite the lack of moisture in the maintenance hangar. The scientific community struggled to develop theories that could account for the observed phenomena without completely abandoning established principles of physics and biology. Quantum physicists suggested the possibility of dimensional overlaps or parallel realities where the normal laws of nature might not apply. They proposed that Sarah Chen might exist simultaneously in multiple states, missing in our reality while somehow present in the aircraft engine in a form that defied conventional understanding. Biologists proposed unknown preservation mechanisms that could maintain organ function in extreme environments, drawing parallels to extremophile organisms that survive in conditions previously thought to be incompatible with life. They theorized about quantum biological processes that could allow consciousness to exist independently of traditional neural networks, maintaining awareness and basic functions through mechanisms that science had not yet discovered. Aviation engineers were forced to reconsider their fundamental understanding of how foreign objects interact with jet engine components, but none of the proposed explanations could account for the complete impossibility of what had been discovered. The lungs violated every principle of thermodynamics, material science, and mechanical engineering that governed the design and operation of commercial aircraft engines. The lungs continued breathing for 17 more days before finally falling still, each day bringing new mysteries and deeper questions about the nature of life, death, and consciousness. During those final weeks, they exhibited behaviors that suggested not just awareness, but memory and emotional response. Medical monitoring equipment detected what appeared to be dreamlike brainwave patterns emanating from the tissue, rapid eye movement cycles that should have been impossible without eyes or a nervous system to generate them. Nurses working the night shift reported that the breathing would sometimes synchronize with lullabies played softly in the examination room, as if the organs recognized melodies that had once comforted the child they belonged to. The rhythm would slow and deepen during familiar songs, particularly a Spanish lullaby that Sarah's grandmother had sung to her every night before bed. The organs seemed to find peace in these moments, the distressed breathing pattern giving way to the calm rhythm of restful sleep. On the 18th day after their discovery, at exactly 8:30 in the morning, the lungs took one final deep breath and then fell completely still. The timing was not coincidental. Medical records showed that 8:30 a.m. was the exact time Sarah Chen had been reported missing from her backyard 6 months and 18 days earlier, the moment when her mother had called out for lunch and received no response from the child who had been playing quietly in the garden just minutes before. The tissue immediately began showing signs of normal decomposition, the pink color fading to gray and then to the brown of death within hours. All cellular activity ceased simultaneously, as if whatever impossible force had been sustaining life in the disembodied organs had simply chosen to let go. Dr. Valdez noted in her final report that the cessation of function was unlike any natural death she had observed, lacking the gradual decline that characterizes normal biological processes. The official investigation was closed with a finding of undetermined cause, a designation that satisfied no one but reflected the complete inability of science, medicine, and aviation engineering to explain what had occurred. The aircraft was returned to service after extensive inspection and blessing ceremonies conducted by religious leaders from multiple denominations, each attempting to cleanse whatever spiritual contamination might linger in the machine. Flight 742 continues to operate scheduled passenger service today, carrying travelers between cities across the American West with no apparent mechanical problems. But many crew members have reported unusual experiences during flights on the aircraft, phenomena that echo the impossible discovery made in the Denver maintenance hangar. Flight attendants describe cold spots in the passenger cabin that move through the aircraft like invisible presences, the faint sound of children's laughter coming from empty seats, and passenger call buttons that illuminate without being pressed. Pilots report occasional anomalies in engine performance data that resolve themselves before maintenance crews can investigate, and navigation equipment that briefly shows course deviations toward locations associated with missing children cases. But the story doesn't end with Sarah Chen's lungs finally falling silent in that sterile medical examination room. 3 weeks after the organs stopped breathing, maintenance crews at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport discovered something that sent renewed chills through the aviation industry and confirmed the worst fears of investigators who had hoped the Denver incident was an isolated anomaly.
During routine inspection of a Boeing 737 that had recently begun experiencing unexplained vibrations and the same sweet floral odor that had characterized the Denver discovery, mechanics found a child's heart beating steadily inside the starboard engine nacelle. The heart belonged to Marcus Thompson, a 9-year-old boy who had vanished from the Seattle area 8 months earlier while walking home from school on a route he had traveled safely hundreds of times. The heart continues beating today, despite being removed from any conceivable source of blood or electrical impulse that could sustain cardiac function. Medical examination has confirmed that the organ shows the same impossible signs of life and awareness that characterized Sarah Chen's breathing lungs, responding to stimuli and maintaining cellular activity that defies biological explanation. Federal investigators have established a classified task force dedicated to monitoring aircraft engines for similar discoveries, but they refuse to release information about how many other cases they may have encountered or what patterns might connect the disappearances to specific aircraft or flight routes. Aviation industry insiders speak in whispers about maintenance protocols that have been quietly changed, inspection procedures that now include searches for organic material, and specialized teams trained to handle discoveries that cannot be explained by conventional means. Aviation mechanics across the country now perform their duties with a new kind of dread, knowing that the next engine they open might contain evidence of horrors that exist beyond human understanding.
Maintenance hangars that once echoed with the familiar sounds of tools and machinery now carry whispered conversations about children who vanish without trace and aircraft that carry more than passengers through the sky. The families of missing children have begun to ask new questions about the aircraft that fly overhead, wondering if their loved ones might be present in ways that search teams and police investigations could never discover. Support groups for parents of missing children now include discussions about aviation industry cover-ups and the possibility that some disappearances lead to fates that exist outside the normal boundaries of life and death. What would you do if you were the mechanic who made that first impossible discovery in the engine compartment, faced with evidence that challenged everything you thought you knew about reality?
Do you think this was just an elaborate hoax designed to exploit the grief of families with missing children, or evidence that some disappearances lead to fates worse than death? Share your thoughts in the comments below and subscribe for more aviation investigations that reveal the mysteries hiding in plain sight above our heads.